For our third session today in the education track, we are very honoured to have Dr. Alison here. I made a joke about the physics with the last session. We were talking about Pi Game Zero, and Dr. Alison here, in fact, has her doctorate in physics, which, strangely enough, has helped her to be a queen of coding. All things coding, award-winning, teaching programming, and currently, strangely, working at the University of Sydney with business.
Yes.
Okay, because I can make that connection. And it seems that Alison and Stephen have done a bit of paper, scissors, rock for this session, and it looks like Alison has lost that one because you are the one presenting this session. So we welcome you very much to our session, and we're looking forward to hearing all about collaboration in the classroom with programming. Please welcome Dr. Alison.
Okay, so I'm Alison, and I'm the one giving this talk on behalf of myself and Stephen over here. So we are both at the University of Sydney in the School of Business, and you might be thinking, why are you at PyCon? But we actually teach a lot of programming in Python, but we usually teach Python programming alongside something else. So we're teaching, Python and data science, Python and maths, Python and dashboarding. Sometimes we do just teach Python, but yeah, lots of Python in there. We probably have different students to the last couple of speakers who were teaching high school students. We're obviously teaching university students. We have undergraduates, postgraduates, international students as well. So they're quite different. But most of our students are still generally beginner Python programmers, because obviously most people coming to the business school don't usually have like a software background. So in this talk, I thought I would share with you guys ways in which we've introduced collaborative programming into our classes. So first up, why do we collaborate? So just in general, not even just in education, collaborations are generally quite good. I probably don't have to convince you guys too much about that. There's lots of cool ideas out there that get meshed together, and I thought I'd give you a couple of examples. So first example of collaborations out there are like Uniqlo and like Pokemon, and you can get these slaying cool t-shirts that you can wear around. There's also collaborations in like the music industry, and for example, one of the best songs that ever came out, you'll remember Justin Bieber's Baby with Ludacris. And then the last example I thought I would share is something that I think everyone really needs in their life, but they may not know that they need it. It's Vegemite Monopoly, which I think is quite fun. No, but in all seriousness, collaborations are actually really good. And there's a lot of, educational research out there that tells us it's really good for our students as well. Now, I'm not going to bore your socks off with that, but I thought I would just give you a few examples. So one example is CAST, which is a non-for-profit organisation which dives into some of the literature around education, and they kind of came up with these universal designs for learning guidelines that you can go and look at, and they're supposed to help teachers teach better. And one of the things they recommend is fostering collaboration and community in the classroom, and they have a couple of examples of why that's useful. One of them is mentoring through peers can greatly increase opportunities for one-on-one support, and I think this is really helpful because usually there's one teacher and a lot of students, and you can't just give every student, one-on-one time. But if students are kind of teaching each other, you kind of get more feedback for the students more quickly. And this is especially true in our courses where we have hundreds of students and there's like one lecturer. So getting students to learn from each other is really great for us too. It's also a great way to provide opportunities for students to learn to work together, because this is an important thing that you need to do in everyday life anyway. So it's a great way for them to practice that. If you wanted to know more about some of the education literature around there, if you look on the CAST website, they actually give a list of other papers that you can read, and surprise, surprise, most of them will tell you collaboration is good for students. Another example I have is there's this thing called the conversational framework, and in that there are 6 types of learning that are kind of listed as how students learn. So these are acquisition, inquiry, practice, production, discussion, and collaboration. And collaboration is actually a really important aspect because it it says here, it combines both learning through practice and discussion. So I think in discussion, it's good for students to discuss, but often they can still walk away from the end of the discussion and both have different ideas and just be like, we agree to disagree. But when you have to collaborate, those students have to come to some sort of mutual understanding, and to do that, they have to practice all their communication skills. They need to really understand their own ideas and beliefs and be able to voice those. And then usually they'll have to think about those ideas and really critique them, because if a friend has different ideas, they have to kind of meet in the middle and often have to readjust what they're thinking at the time. So another, I guess, less noble kind of reason why we want students to collaborate is, for us, sometimes it's a learning outcome for the students. We're literally told, in this unit, we're going to teach students collaboration. But from a university side as well, collaboration, I think, is a really good way to get students engaged, because students don't actually have to come to class, unlike in high school where you're forced to be there. So we really need to try and get the engagement up so that students are still coming to our tutorials and our lectures. And I think one way to do that is through collaborations, because they're making friends and are more motivated to show their face. Okay, so I would say that most of the time now we're teaching programming where it's an individual exercise, and to be totally honest, it's because it's really easy. We know it's going to work, we give them a computer, we give them the exercises, they can work through it. Students have different, I guess, levels of knowledge, so if they're working at their own pace, you know that they're keeping up with where they're going. Sometimes we get adventurous, and then they go into pair programming, and usually in this kind of scenario, you have one person driving the computer, and the other person, if they're not very confident, usually just sitting there and watching, which is not the most ideal. And then sometimes you can be even more adventurous, and it's a bit risky trying to get more than 2 people on the same computer trying to share. And let's be honest, 3's a crowd, and it gets really hard for them to contribute equally. Almost always, there's one person on the side just being like, I don't know what's going on. So that's kind of one of the biggest barriers to teaching collaborative programming, and I've got a couple of others here. So this is the first one I kind of talked about, is like you just have one keyboard, one mouse, and you kind of got to share between lots of people. Really difficult. Sometimes you have classrooms that are not really set up for collaboration, like we have desks that just don't move, the computers on them, you can't rotate the screens. It's just not very easy to even just collaborate on a piece of paper. Other things is sometimes you don't have everyone in the same classroom, and probably if you were teaching through COVID, you probably had this experience, which was not awesome, but hopefully we don't have that so much anymore. But even now, we still have to deal with students trying to work together, not in the same room, for example, group projects, and they're doing this outside of normal class time. Another one, sometimes students just don't want to. They're just looking at you and you're trying to put them in the groups and they're like, can I just do it by myself, please? And they're just not helping out and they just don't want to. That happens. And then the last one is sometimes because there are all those hurdles that us as teachers have to get through to get them to working together, sometimes it's just easier for us to just design exercises that work for like one person. And trying to, harangue all the students to work together is too much effort and no. So what I wanted to show you is kind of one way in which we can get past a lot of these barriers and to try and encourage collaboration in our classes. So the solution that we've been using is using these collaborative code environments. So there are lots of different platforms that offer these, and there's a couple of examples here, but there are a lot more, and I'm not the expert on all of them. But in general, the idea is there is a little code workspace where students can come in, they've got all their code files there, and they can all type in it like in a Google Doc. So you can all be writing code together, etc. So like I said, I'm not the expert on this. At our university, we're using Ed, and Ed has these things called workspaces, which again, they just have all their code in one place. They all jump into the workspace and you can see them all typing. So if you look at the kind of diagrams, I'm not sure if they're too small, you have like an anonymous koala, a turtle, and a bird, and they're all typing away. Okay. So even though I'm going to talk about what we do with Ed, it's probably, all the lessons I'm going to share are probably easily translatable to a lot of these other platforms. Okay, so the first one I wanted to talk about is in-class exercises. So this is where we're trying to get students to collaborate, but there's a teacher in the room kind of guiding the session. So the code solutions that I kind of popped up, I think tick a lot of boxes in terms of getting past the barriers that I kind of showed. So the first one, obviously, it's a lot easier to get multiple students working on the same code file when you're not physically limited to them all crowding around a computer. Another benefit is with these kind of code workspaces, it's up to you as to how many students are in each one. So you can have small groups if they want to like collaborate with their friends, or you can have larger groups if you want to do it as a class. And if you do have that one student who just don't wanna, they can also just go do it on their own as well. So yeah. A lot of these also come equipped with all the tools that you ever need. So for us, we use Python, we use Jupyter Notebooks, Stephen runs a dashboarding unit. They can do all of these in these nice workspaces. So essentially any kind of activity that we want to run, we usually have the capacity to do it and make custom content for the courses that we want to teach. Next tick is that it's really flexible. So we tend to find that because you can kind of do whatever you wanted with these platforms, as long as you write the exercises, you can choose even on the day how you want to run the classroom. So we would write the same exercise. For example, we give them a set of Jupyter notebooks and it's a walkthrough and they're all supposed to answer little bits of code as they go. You can do this as a class activity where the whole class jumps in and answers on the board almost, but from their seats. You can also do it where the students just follow along. You could also split the students out into little groups and they can work in little groups doing that together. So it's really up to you and your tutors or your teachers and your kind of style, and it's really easy to adapt. So if you've walked into your classroom and the students are like, oh, you can't be bothered to do anything today, then you can kind of change tactic very quickly based on what your students want to do. And also, it's generally not limited to Python, even though we pretty much have just been using it for Python. It also works for both online and in-person activities. We've tried these for both online classes and in-person with the same content, so we don't have to try and do two different versions. And we found that the experience is pretty much the same. And it's helped us a lot because back before when COVID first started, trying to get coding over the computer and over Zoom was really, really hard because it's kind of limited to screen sharing and only one screen. So this has helped a lot because you can just code straight with the student. And then the last thing, and this is my favorite, is it's super convenient for us. So as teachers, there's always so much work to do, and having less work is better. In this kind of setup, you don't really have to worry about, students all getting their Python set up or students having different package versions, which is a big pain. And it's easy for us to get the files to the students without having to be like, you have to download it from here and then you got to open it and all of that. And also we have access controls so that if we want to, we can make things read and write only. Read only. If we want to, we can put students in groups and they can only see their groups work. So having this simple setup makes our life just 100 times easier. So here is a quick demo of how I ran this in an online class. Obviously, we couldn't really record an in-person class, so this is the online one. And basically, in this particular setup, we have a Jupyter notebook. They've got all these kind of exercises to guide them through, but I'm still there and I would tell someone like, person A can go do this line of code, person B can do this line of code, person C can do this line of code, and you can see them pretty happy typing away. I'm not sure how obvious it is, but coming up you can see that there are actually going to be people jumping into this second line of code who are not the original typer, and it's another student coming in and correcting another student, which is really good to see as well because the students are learning from each other's mistakes, and you can also see people make mistakes anonymously, which is kind of nice. It takes the fear factor out of getting things wrong, and you can see the students really working together. So a couple of notes about our experiences in the classroom. So the things we have tried is, like I said, we have these tutorials where students can either work as a class or they can work in little groups with these kind of, exercises. But we've also tried these, for example, in live lectures more as a demo. So instead of having students kind of jump in and collaborate straight away, we often do this as we're going to demo some code and then we do it as a read only, but students can see the code happening on their screens as well, which is great for us because students, they want copies of everything. They're just like, where can I get a copy of the code, miss? And so this handles that really well. And also, if you're doing like a Python demo and there's snippets of code that they don't understand, because it's straight on their screen, they can actually copy and paste that little part and run it in real time and just check their understanding as you're going through the demo. Other design approaches that we had when we were designing these exercises is, I think the biggest tip I would have is to make sure the instructions are clear. So this isn't necessarily even in just the way you're designing the exercises, even just standing up in front of the class at the beginning of the session and verbally telling the students how it's going to run. That's really important because I've seen where communication there breaks down. You go, okay, go and do it, have fun. And they'll just sit there and look at you. So I think really clear instructions is super important. Another thing is I found we got more participation when the exercises were smaller and a little bit more manageable. And I think it's because, to be honest, coding in front of people is really scary. And for a student who's not necessarily that confident, you're not really going to try something you're not really sure about. So even just at the start, just having really simple exercises so they can start participating, get comfortable with that, it really helps encourage participation later on. And again, another nice thing about some of these platforms is you can change people's names so they can sign up as their favorite animal or some movie character, and then they can do things anonymously if you are doing a class exercise, because it's way less scary if you know you can make a mistake and no one knows it was you. Other observations we had, so we found that generally students really did enjoy this. We got a lot of positive feedback and a lot of students being loud in a class, and actually for us at a university, we want our students to be naughty and loud, which is kind of a little bit different because mostly they're just really quiet and don't talk. So opposite problems from you guys maybe. Students liked participating anonymously, and then we also saw that students working in groups, they were able to teach each other as well and learn from each other, which is great because they're not just relying on the couple of tutors or lecturers in the room. Pitfalls that we kind of had, like I said, clear instructions were really important. It was harder in group work if I think groups got bigger than 5 because there's only so many bits of code that you can all write at the same time before the communication breaks down and it's just chaos. So I think groups of 3 and 4 worked quite well. Sometimes when you're putting groups together, there is a little bit of social engineering. But we did have, sometimes if you had an experienced programmer and like a couple of people less confident, the really experienced person would tend to dominate. But I did actually see what was really interesting is one time we had a student who really dominated, but then they would get it all wrong. So they were just really cocky, I think. And it was interesting to see the other students catching up and fixing this person's mistake. And I think it was a really good learning experience for both sets of students because the student who thought they knew everything might have realized, oh, maybe I'm not the smartest person in the room. And that's a hard lesson to try and teach students sometimes. And the students who were a bit slower, they might have realized that the person who seems the most confident is not always the best. And I think that helped build their confidence as well. Quickly, the last couple of things is we also use this for group projects, so not in the classroom, they were kind of doing it in their own time. So this comes with slightly different challenges. One of the big challenges is it's really clumsy for students to figure out how to work together at the same time, and they're kind of resorting to email file sharing, which is a pain. And it's hard for students to divide up code in the same way they can like divide up a report. Because a report, you go, you do the introduction, you do this section, I'll do the conclusion. With the code, our students are beginner programmers. They can't be like, you write this function and then I'll write this function and I'll tie it all together. It's kind of, they need to be doing it as they're going along. And so using these collaborative workspaces, the students had access to the code at all times. They could see what their friends were doing. They could be like, I have a spare hour, I can jump in now, rather than be like, oh, person A hasn't finished this section, so I can't start my section. And it's also harder for free riders in the group because free riders just go, I never got a code. How was I supposed to help? They didn't send it to me. So now, well, there's no excuses. Other things, again, installations and setups. And maybe this would be less problematic with the class of 30, but we have cohorts of like hundreds of students, like 600, 700, sometimes we've had 1,000. And so having to deal with all the students having the same installations and setups is a pain. And so this kind of takes care of all of that for you. And then also it helps students collaborate remotely, so they don't always have to try and find time to meet up, especially when your timelines for your project are quite short. They can kind of do it in their own time, and there's a live chat so that they can chat to each other, leave notes to each other as well. And then a couple of other benefits for us, which I thought were really great, is it's really easy for us to distribute scaffolds for assessments. For example, we know exactly what we want the students to do, and to guide them, we give them that scaffold. It's easy to just put that in a workspace, and they can kind of clone that workspace for their own group and work through that. And also there are the access controls so that different groups cannot just jump into another group's assessment task and copy. Yeah, so this is the feedback we had on the group projects. It's a bit difficult for us because we're obviously not watching the students straight in person, but what we found in one of my courses, we got over a third of the students using the workspaces. In Steve's course, they had over 90%, and I think one of the lessons here was actually in Stephen's course, he was kind of showing them throughout the semester how to use these tools and how to work collaboratively, and then led them into the group assignment, whereas in my course, it was my first time. We didn't really try to guide the students into that. We just kind of went, oh, this is a tool that you can use. So they would have had to discover it themselves. So I guess my lesson learned from this is to make sure the students are comfortable to use the tools so that they actually make use of them when it comes down to it. And then there are some quotes in here that you can have a quick read of, but they found that they really enjoyed this form of collaboration compared to previous units when they didn't have these options. Okay, so that's it from me. I hope that was useful in terms of thinking about collaborating in the classroom or trying to add that in, even though it's a little bit scary. So we'll be around for questions as well with us.
Thank you. Ooh, pick me at the front. I've got a baby, so pick me. Go for it.
It's not my baby. Great talk. The question I had was, when you're going through the tutorials in class, the example you showed had one function where student A wrote one line, student B wrote another, and student C wrote a third. How do you go about divvying those up? I feel like that would be really easy to have the students treading on each other's toes and having a bit of a hard time with that.
Actually, I was really surprised. So this was quite a small class, so we only had 5 or 6 students, and to be honest, some of them didn't want to do anything. They just watched. So we probably had 4 students who were actually active, and what you don't see in this video is I spent quite a bit of time explaining the calculations for each one, and then literally I just underlined it and said, one person do this, one person do this, one person do this. And I don't know, they just kind of sorted themselves out. I think once they put the cursor there, it kind of dibs it. And they're just like, this is my one. But then obviously you saw people coming back and fixing up other people's code. So I don't know, the students were smart.
Smart students, self-selected. Any other hands up? Coming your way. So sorry.
Thank you for the talk. Did you use this for assessment as well, and to match the teaching pedagogy that you used? And how did you go about, if you did, how did you go about ensuring that all students contributed equally?
Okay, so we only use it for assessment in the group projects, not in the in-person tasks. And to be honest, you still don't have any guarantees that one person just did all of the code and the other people watched, but it gets harder for students to hide. And in addition to this, we usually get the students to record, for example, meeting minutes. So at each meeting they say what they're going to do, and then if a student is like, I'm going to do this bit of code, this person's doing this bit of code, it's harder to make excuses in the next meeting that they didn't contribute. So you can still free ride if you were really determined to. But we also get students to write a statement of contribution saying what parts of the project they contributed to, and we do tell them there are mark adjustments if they're not contributing, or if it's like a group comes forward and they say this person hasn't done anything, and it's a lot harder for them to make excuses for not doing it. And so I think the threat of losing marks or being told they're going to get 0 if they don't contribute does scare them.
Hi, so you mentioned providing clear instructions and then small and manageable tasks. What's your methodology with coming up with those, and what's some criteria that you use to follow that?
I don't think I have anything so formal, to be totally honest. But we do get, in our teaching, we're lucky enough to have quite large teaching teams, and you do usually get someone to do a quality assurance check. So if you've written out a set of clear instructions, you can get someone to read them and make sure that they think that's clear as well. And we do rely on feedback from our tutors every time to say, were the instructions clear? Did this make sense? Could the students do this task? Maybe we find out at the end of the tutorial that no one could do anything, and then we have to come back and, it's gone, redo it for the next semester, or sometimes we come back and we find that all the students could do it. Also, in a live class, you do have a bit of luxury in terms of if they're not quite getting it because you weren't very clear, you can actually break it down live for them and go, okay, let's park that problem, let's do a simpler problem. So yeah.
So my question was just how much do you find yourself having to teach collaboration techniques? Because like I remember when I was in school and uni, I was that free rider, and the reason was because I didn't know what was going on and I didn't know collaboration tools. Now I love collaborating. So do you ever find that you have students that need to learn tools or techniques?
So we don't so much formally teach it, but we do what we can in terms of the tutorial experience to try and promote collaborations early in the classes than like just chucking them in at the deep end for a group assignment, because I think that if you're starting in the tutorials, getting students to start working with each other early on, and also starting to form relationships with fellow students, and students are like, oh, I've got a group assignment, I better go to the tutorial to find someone to do the assignment with, then that helps the communications later. But I mean, we still have issues, as always, every semester, students having group work problems, but getting them to come to us early and reporting them, sometimes we can step in and give a student a kick and say, you're going to get 0 if you don't do anything, which can help as well.
Okay, so you've answered the what do you do with the students who are trying to free ride, but my question is the other side. I see in my classrooms super confident students who will go and type the whole thing before some of the slower students, the thinking students that will get there, even have an opportunity to start or to fix their own mistakes before someone comes in and fixes it for them. What do you do and say about that?
So I haven't had a chance to do this yet because it was the first time kind of trialing this, but one of the things that I would do this coming up semester is if we identify students who are really that strong, I know we do want them to collaborate, but maybe we could get them to pair them into groups with people of the same difficulty level as them, so that the really fast people can get together really quickly. And then I do encourage students that if they finish early, maybe go and help another group, but I would encourage them to not be like touching the computer. They have to explain the things so that the students have, I guess, an extra teacher almost in the classroom. But also, if they're not useful in that way, we can just send them away. They finish the tutorial early, and we can spend more time with the students who really need that extra support.
Another question?
I was wondering about the intersection of anonymity and miscreants. I can only imagine, like from my experience teaching in universities, that giving someone an anonymous ability to edit someone else's code would end up with either genitalia or all of the commas being replaced with full stops.
Yep.
Do these platforms provide mechanisms for auditing what's going on, or booting someone from editing but still leaving them in the class, or anything like that?
Yeah, so I can't speak about all the platforms, but at least on Ed, there's a caveat when you're anonymous. You're anonymous to other students, but not to staff. So we can figure out who everyone is, and we can call them out, and sometimes we do have those problems, but we have, I guess, less problems because we do have university students, and the people who don't want to participate actually just don't come to class. So you don't have as many troublemakers, but we do have access controls. For example, you can see people typing, and you can actually kick people out of if you're doing like a live session, you can say you're gone. But yeah, I think because we can tell them that we know who they are and we can track it down, there's less incentive for them to be naughty.
Any other questions? Lovely. Oh, one more. You're multitasking.
The child has a question. No. I wanted to know whether you'd looked into actually quantifying the confidence boost given to students, like as a result of seeing, oh wow, everyone else makes the same silly mistakes that I'm making as well.
We haven't got it specifically for this, but we do run surveys, but most of it is just feedback from the programming in general. We don't specifically go, in this tutorial you collaborated. So we don't actually have any of those stats. But in general, a lot of the things that we've been doing in general, teaching Python, the students have been very happy, and they do say like they've learnt more, they felt more confident, and they really appreciate that we've tried to make things more accessible for everyone. But no specific quotes or stats, unfortunately.
Lovely, thank you so much. So we have the Magic PyCon Cup to say thank you very much for being a speaker. And we also have one for your offsider who obviously lost the game of scissors, papers, rock.
He's presenting later.
Early cup. And I think you'll find that hopefully the ability to collaborate at university level becomes a bit easier in a few years' time, because I know that the Australian curriculum, you know, as it flows through schools, hopefully their skill set by the time they get to you will be a bit better in a few years' time. So it's a very valuable skill and it's very much acknowledged. So thank you very much for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.